Hello everybody and welcome back to the United Stand. I am joined with another exclusive interview with Ben Jacobs. We have a lot to catch up on, the striker situation, the goalkeeper situation and much, much more. So make sure you get your comments in. But Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon for you, but good morning for me. I'm in Philadelphia here. It's 7 a.m. in the morning, so there's a bit of commitment to the United Stand.
Exactly, Ben. We love the commitment. 7 a.m. just to come and bring us the latest Manchester United updates. We love it. I want to begin with the Viktor Gyokeres story, or saga, I should say. It does seem to be turning into a little bit of a saga. There's been mixed messages on this one. Preference to go to Arsenal was widely reported, and it was recently just reported that apparently Viktor Gyokeres has refused to have clear the air talks with Sporting and has threatened to go on strike as he tries to force a move through. Where that move is going to be, is there any clarification you can give us on the story about the preference to Arsenal and also his situation with Sporting at the moment?
Yeah, as I reported, and I don't think a lot has really changed. Viktor Gyokeres would welcome a bid from Arsenal, but that doesn't mean he's rejected Manchester United. And when you have a preference or a club you'd like to engage with, then things can still change throughout the window. So we're not in a situation where he's discounted Manchester United, but it's two different kind of approaches, because Arsenal are actively working on both Sesko and Gyokeres before making a determination. Manchester United are shortlisting their striker options. And as I broke, Viktor Gyokeres is still open also to Manchester United, but they've not approached Sporting. So Arsenal are in a more advanced position, and it looks like the more concrete move. But Gyokeres will know that Sesko is a possibility for Arsenal too. And as a consequence, the player has made it clear that he would go to Arsenal. And part of that is making it absolutely abundantly clear to Arsenal, if they can move and get it done, then he's ready. And you kind of have to do that when you're a player who knows that you've got competition and another target is also being advanced simultaneously. And that's how Andrea Berta works. With Manchester United, they went all in on Delap. Had they won the Europa League final, they might well have got him. The player was keen to move back to the Northwest, but Chelsea made a strong pitch. They've got Champions League football. So then Manchester United have had to draw up a list of new striker targets. And we've heard Gyokeres for quite some time. There's also Hugo Ekitike, and there'll be more on that list as well. And I don't think Manchester United will have the budget or even the desire to necessarily move today, tomorrow in a formal sense. It may take a little bit more time. The situation with Gyokeres and Sporting is tense, and there's a lot of mudslinging at the moment. Gyokeres still insists that under Hugo Viana now at Manchester City, there was this verbal pact that said, stay last season and you can leave for 70 million euros. And that is 30 million below his release clause. Whereas now Sporting are manufacturing a bit of a bidding war, and their president has said the number won't be 90 or 100, but there's no guarantee that it will be 70 either. So Sporting want more, and Gyokeres is digging in his heels to try and get them to stick to the original number. And what this is really about is not actually a specific number, it's how the transfer is handled. Because as I think I've said before, Gyokeres' expectation is that all suitors come to him. He has permission to speak to them as part of this pact. He says where he wants to go. Then the suitor goes to Sporting with the player's blessing and says, effectively, I want to pay that 70 million number. And all they have to do is negotiate the payment terms. But the club to club is simple. Now Sporting are saying, you got to come to us. There's more than one bidder, and therefore they want a higher number. And Gyokeres is saying, hang on a minute, that's not how it was supposed to work. And this is why we're hearing reports in Portugal saying he's going to go on strike. Let's see whether it comes to that. Some kind of statement like Caicedo did in the window where he didn't move but had interest from Chelsea and Arsenal, or if actually it all blows over. I still think there's a realistic possibility that Gyokeres goes for 70 million euros. I think Arsenal's perspective on Sesko is they want to do that at 70 million or they'll walk away. If they can get both players for 70 million, they'll have a big choice to make. If they can only get one for 70 million, that might be the one that Arsenal go for. So the simple answer is Gyokeres would welcome a bid from Arsenal, but he still hasn't rejected Manchester United. So we're not yet in a position, even though Arsenal are advancing and Manchester United is still deciding, we're not yet in a position where we can definitively say Manchester United are out of the race. But it's clear that Arsenal are in a more advanced position of talks and negotiations.
And do you think that's the reason why Manchester United haven't tried to advance this deal and gone to speak to Sporting, because they know that Arsenal are there and they are the preference? So maybe Manchester United are waiting to see what develops with that before they make that move?
Well, I don't think Manchester United would ever wait for Arsenal. I don't think a club of this stature would sit back and say, let's see if Arsenal can succeed. We think that the race is run. It's more just down to the fact that Brian and Mbeumo preference, that's where the rest of that initial 100 million or so is going to go, if they can get that over the line. And the number 9 is more complicated. They would likely want to put the outlay on the next financial year. They need to resolve some outgoings. Even if you discount the finances, they need to determine what's going on with Rasmus Højlund. I think Zirkzee more likely to stay at this stage, but there's a lot of moving parts. And the last thing I think Manchester United would want to do is escalate Gyokeres and then find that they don't have the financial power to immediately do Mbeumo, because that's when you start to get nervous and say, the player's got a preference of Manchester United, but what if he doesn't want to wait around all day? I think the reason why Manchester United have delayed on Gyokeres and other targets is partly because they've had to draw up this new list after Liam Delap, who was the top target. And second of all, because they know that Gyokeres is going to dig in and go where he wants to go. This is not a scenario where whoever agrees a package first with Sporting will win the race. And that, again, is what's causing the friction with Gyokeres. He is of the belief that he can control the timeline, that he can delay, that he can speak to all suitors, and he can decide where he wants to go. And then when that club gets the green light, they have simple club-to-club negotiations with Sporting. And that, again, is why we're getting this element of acrimony now and drama, because Sporting are saying, we don't really care at the moment about the player's preference. Maybe that's a bit unfair and strong and poorly worded on my part. But Sporting are saying, we think you're going to get your move either way. So we want as many clubs as possible to engage to get the highest possible price. And Gyokeres is thinking, that changes the timeline. It forces a bidding war. It removes the calmness that he wants to have gone away on holiday, decide what he wants to do, and basically control this narrative. So this pact wasn't only about a number, it empowered the player to define where he wants to go and on what terms. And now it's flipped and it's Sporting that are driving everything. So Arsenal could be there, but it was said to me before, I feel like I've said this on 100 podcasts now, but it was described to me, and I think it's an apt analogy, as Edu picked who he wanted and went with it. Berta's like a guy going to a party, laying out 4 outfits. He tries all of them on, and only at the last minute does he decide what he's going to wear and go to that party. And in the context of transfers, he'll take Šeško Gyokeres right to the point of, we could actually sign this thing, and then he'll decide which one he wants to go for. And I think that's smart in this context, because if you want Šeško for 70 and no more, and if you want Gyokeres at the pack number of 70, because the prices are the same, it makes sense to push for both and try and get one club to say yes, because then the other club might have to cede and say yes, and then you can decide which one you want to go for. So again, Gyokeres would absolutely join Arsenal, and if they get that deal done quickly, Manchester United formally may not even enter the race. But Ruben Amorim loves the idea of reuniting from Gyokeres, and he certainly at this point hasn't turned Manchester United down, despite some reports.
I was going to say that because it's interesting that Arsenal is the preference. I know they've got European football, and that makes a big difference. But Ruben Amorim's got a great relationship with Gyokeres, is what we've heard, and I'm sure he'll be speaking to him. So it's interesting that he's still maybe preferring the new project over going back with a manager who he knows very well. But
yeah, I think also, though, you've got different aspects, Champions League football, wages, the fact that Arsenal put in more legwork. If you're Gyokeres, it's one thing having the Ruben Amorim link, but once again, they went for Delap, and strikers don't forget that. So Manchester United showed their hand. It was obvious they wanted Delap. If Delap came in, they wouldn't have signed Gyokeres or any other striker in that mode in addition. So you have a scenario where Manchester United may feel like a natural fit, and people may be wondering, why doesn't Gyokeres just come because of Amorim? But he may be thinking, Arsenal have really courted me quite hard, whereas Manchester United went for Delap. Similarly, he may be thinking, they might do Šeško, and they're playing both of the clubs and both of the players until they decide who they want. If someone's a bit more decisive, that may change the narrative as well. So we're probably still going to get some twists and turns here. It's really easy to think it should resolve itself now. But a lot of clubs like Manchester United, because they weren't in the Club World Cup, they're kind of thinking we want to be decisive, but it's basically just a few days into the main part of the window. And I think because so much business was done in that 1st to 10th of June period, there's a lot of fans now for all clubs that say, we're in limbo, we're not acting, we're not being decisive. But it is so early in the summer, and selling clubs have a big advantage with so much time left. And as a result, sometimes doing nothing is actually doing something, because you're just waiting for that time to pass. You're making the selling club sweat, and it gives you a bit more ascendancy in the negotiations. And this is why it's never just bid, bid, bid. You have to play the market, you have to pay the time frame, and we're still so early in the summer. And that, I think, is why Sporting feel in a very strong position here. And we may not get absolute clarity on Gyokeres as a consequence for a few more days or weeks. It will first depend on Arsenal, I think. Do they do Gyokeres or Šeško? If they do Gyokeres, maybe it's quite simple. If they move for Šeško, Gyokeres becomes an open race, and then I would still keep an eye on Manchester United. And the last thing I'd say is Gyokeres, I think, from speaking to sources, will be cheaper all in than Hugo Ekitike in terms of agent fees, in terms of fee. His wage will be higher than Ekitike, but the Ekitike number is 100 million euros at the moment. Maybe that comes down a little bit, but it's 100 million for Frankfurt. The Gyokeres fee at 70 saves you that 30 million, which offsets the wage and the agent fees and so on. So I think if Manchester United are given a straight choice, and it's neat and it's hypothetical because you rarely do get this chance for two top players to make a choice between one or the other and not have other clubs come in. But if they were given right now a straight choice internally, do you want Gyokeres or Ekitike? I think they would go for Gyokeres because it's a profile that Ruben Amorim knows and trusts. And overall, because of that Frankfurt number, he's cheaper as well.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Ben. You're already ahead of the game. I was literally just about to ask you about how you spoke about the striker list that Manchester United have drawn up and what options they are. But one that has broke since we last spoke was Ekitike, and Manchester United are interested in Ekitike. But I was going to ask you that, like, where does the preference lie? But as you said, if it was on the table, it would be Gyokeres. But how far are the talks with Ekitike, or even if there is any talks? Because it was yesterday I saw a few reports from David Ornstein that he was speaking. He said maybe it's been overdone a little bit. It's not that advanced. I mean, is that your knowledge as well?
Yeah, this was something I said 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't Manchester United at that point. It was Chelsea, and Frankfurt are doing a kind of road trip, in my opinion, of not necessarily exaggeration, but fueling every time they get any kind of approach, because they want a bidding war to try and get their 100 million euros. So first of all, we heard Chelsea were close and he was the top choice, even though they signed Liam Delap. That was not true to my understanding. Now we hear Manchester United enter the table, and all of a sudden Chelsea's cooled. And actually Chelsea was never that hot on Ekitike. He's on their list, but it never advanced. And suddenly it's Manchester United. And I still think there's a possibility, especially if Liverpool can't succeed and somehow get Alexander Isak, that Ekitike is very high in their thinking. And we're hearing a lot of noise. And at the end of the day, the club keeps changing. That's the so-called front runner. But when I'm going to these clubs from England, none of these Premier League clubs are advanced on Ekitike. They like the profile. They don't like the price. They realize they're going to have to wait for that price to drop. If you want to do the deal now, it's 100 million. You want to do the deal in July, it might be 100 million. You want to do the deal in August, maybe at that point, the player wants the move, gets a bit more agitated, time is running out. Perhaps the price drops by 5 or 10 million euros. And then at 85, 90, 95, and depending on how much is maybe add-ons, could be a deal that someone's done. But I don't get the impression that Manchester United are going to seriously entertain Ekitike at 100 million. And if they find that 100 million, then they would likely first try and enter the race for Viktor Gyokeres. So yes, appreciation. Yes, they've held talks. They've absolutely done outreach. And I think what you have to understand about these kind of players and transfers is that virtually every top club under the sun is making a call, is making an inquiry, is trying to understand the price. But that doesn't mean that they're going to move. It just means that you're doing your job where you're scouring the market. Thousands of names that don't get out there have been looked at, scouted, monitored, discussed internally. Does it really mean that much? No. The key thing with Ekitike is price. And Manchester United are not going to engage at 100 million. But it helps Frankfurt to say Chelsea are pushing, Manchester United are pushing, Liverpool are there, 3 Premier League clubs, bidding war, better chance of getting their 100 million. The reality is when I go to all of these clubs, none of them are confirming anything advanced. None of them are confirming that they've put down a bid. And at the end of it all, I think Ekitike will move. But if that price stays at 100 million, I don't see anything developing with Manchester United. And they certainly are not advanced. They've definitely not placed a bid. So there has been an element of exaggeration which suits Frankfurt. And I still think, once again, that Ekitike, if Liverpool cannot somehow get Alexander Isak, along with maybe Benjamin Sesko, those are the two that I'm really hearing for Liverpool. It was João Pedro, but now that seems to be Newcastle or very possibly Chelsea as well. I think Liverpool are going to get an important number 9. They're going to bring in big money for Darwin Núñez. They're possibly going to get money for Luis Diaz, even though the club position is not for sale. They've told that to Barcelona. But let's see what happens if Saudi put big money and Diaz wants to go. It could still be a somewhat open situation. So just because they've spent that Wirtz money doesn't mean there's more. And I think the dream target, Alexander Isak, if they can't get him, it could be that Liverpool, despite all the noise about Manchester United and Chelsea, are actually the ones that start to develop this Ekitike pursuit in a more concrete manner. But it's nothing yet to get that excited about for Manchester United because of the cost and the fact that it's simply not advanced. They're bidding for Mbeumo. They're simply inquiring on Ekitike. And at this stage, that doesn't mean a great deal.
Well, just on Mbeumo there, actually, it seems like this is slowed down a lot compared to when it first started. Should Manchester United fans be worried, or does that look like it's well on its way to being done? And do you have any timescale on how quickly this deal could be official?
No time frame necessarily, and it's a tactic where Manchester United don't want to bid 3, 4, 5 times and then end up overpaying. And I come back to what I said before. As of now, if things stagnate, players can naturally change their mind. But as of now, there's no fear of a hijack. There's no fear of Tottenham. Bryan Mbeumo has made it clear he wants to join Manchester United. When you get a player saying that, it puts you in a strong position for club-to-club negotiations because you feel like eventually the player will get his wish. It's not done, but Manchester United are optimistic. Things are happening behind the scenes. And I'm told they don't want to formally, verbally may be a different case, they don't want to formally put down that second bid before they understand what the chances of success are. And this is smart and normal. You can bid blind, make a lot of headlines, it appears aggressive, and everyone thinks you're doing something. And if it succeeds, there's celebration. But you can also be more discreet and in between the bids, start verbally putting numbers down and structures down. So when you finally put that second bid in writing, you're in a position where you think it's got a strong chance of success. And that's one thing that's happening. The other thing, I believe, from speaking to sources that's occurred, which has maybe gone a bit under the radar, is Thomas Frank's appointed a Spurs manager. 24 hours later, there's reports, and I respect all other journalists, of a 70 million bid. I'm not aware of that bid. Those that have reported it, all credit to them. I'm not going to shout anyone down, but I'm personally not aware. I've not directly stood up any Tottenham formal bid for Bryan Mbeumo. And it would be very strange to me to see Daniel Levy see a bid of 45 plus 10 from Manchester United and jump coincidentally to the exact alleged asking price of Brighton of 70 million. And I say alleged because there'll always be an inflation in the game. I still think that Brentford, I think I said Brighton before,
yeah,
but Brentford looking for 62.5 million Cunha type number, but that can go up and down a little bit depending on structure of the deal. And that's why the number isn't the only thing to think about. You could go 70, but say it's 40 million quid and 30 million in add-ons and they're all hard to get. Or you could go 62.5 and say in a complete opposite extreme, it's all up front. And then, of course, the selling club are going to say, we love the fact that that's a one payment, 62.5 million, 70 is a bigger number, but we don't want to do 40 plus 30 where we may not even get the 30. So people focus on the number, but really what they're doing behind the scenes now is discussing that structure. So when they finally place a bid, they feel confidence that it might be accepted. And as long as Mbeumo doesn't change his mind and says, I want to join Manchester United, you're not worried about other suitors. So a day after Frank gets appointed, 70 million, Brentford's seeming valuation is out there. That feels like a Brentford tactic to basically say, you've got to move. There might be a hijack here. Frank's coming in. He knows the player. They've bid higher than you. Up your offer, otherwise you're going to lose out. And I think actually Manchester United saying, we'll ignore that. We'll stick to our guns. We'll back our intel the player wants to join. We'll continue verbal discussions to try and get a structure and a number we think has got a high chance of success. Then we'll put in a second bid. That's the kind of tactic. And then from there, it'll be really interesting because Jason Wilcox in his role wants to be decisive. And decisive means, yes, doing this business effectively and quickly. It also means not wasting time blind bidding, which means that hopefully we're not at a 3, 4, 5, 6 type bid situation. They make their second bid. They maybe think it's competitive, but then they're also, because it's equally a definition of decisiveness, prepared to walk away. And that's the kind of new Manchester United I'm expected to see. No so-called Manchester United tax, no doing deals on other people's timeline, no panic buying, trying to use the time between bids to actually learn the right intel to stand a strong chance of success and build relationships with selling clubs. And in addition to that, if it doesn't work out, come a certain point, saying we're prepared to walk away because there's no financial value to be had. So that's the most interesting thing. And I know fans won't want to hear that they could also walk away from Mbeumo, but that's where we're basically at. There is optimism. The player hasn't changed his mind. They will place that second bid eventually. When they do, they'll feel there's a stronger chance of success than the first one. And then if they get to a point where they think they're wasting their time because these numbers are still inflated, with all deals, not just Mbeumo, they'll also be prepared to walk away. Interesting stuff. We've also got quite a few comments in, Ben, asking if we coordinated our outfits today. We didn't. We're just on the same brainwaves. That's what's going on all the way from the other side of the world as well. Yeah, mine's a little bit more sort of dark violet, but yeah, I like it. Maybe next time I'll wear some white as well, and then people will genuinely think we've coordinated. Exactly. We'll see how we turn up, and if we go the same colours again, we're on the same wavelength. Daniel Winstanley has said, I hope Højlund stays. I think he will come good with players around him who can give him good service. Will he stay? Well, that's something that I wanted to ask you as well, just to kind of circle back to the strikers. I know we've spoken about them for a while now, but Rasmus Højlund, the interest there was reports saying he wanted to stay and fight for his place at Manchester United. Is it looking likely that Manchester United might, encourage him to go to Inter? Could that heat up? Or do you think it's looking likely that he would stay? I think Manchester United would like to find a solution to Højlund because of the book loss on any permanent sale. A loan is perhaps more likely. And I think a lot of the Italian clubs linked are only going to do it on those terms. I don't even think there would be an obligation to buy, possibly an option, but that may depend on the player as well. And as you say, Højlund likes the idea of fighting for his place at Manchester United, but there'll have to be a conversation with Ruben Amorim where he understands if he's going to have that opportunity, because players like to wear the Manchester United badge and fight. But if they're definitively told you're too far down the pecking order, you're not going to get the minutes, perspectives can change. So you'd expect Højlund at this point, because no number 9 has arrived, to be saying internally at Manchester United he wants to impress in pre-season and fight for his place. But it's obvious Manchester United want to bring in a number 9 and he could fall down the pecking order. I feel like Ruben Amorim, from people I speak to, prefers to keep Zirkzee because of his flexibility and ability to play effectively in different places across the front line. And I also feel there's a lot of belief within Manchester United that Zirkzee can make a significant improvement in this season to the point where people will suddenly see what he's all about. Whereas the profile of Højlund may be a very similar profile of 9 that they bring in. And then Højlund would obviously have a decision to make as to whether he's going to get enough game time, knowing, for example, that Mbeumo, if he arrives, could also be used in a more advanced position. Zirkzee can lead the line. Maguire, I'm joking, can lead the line. And then, of course, if another number 9 comes in, Højlund may think that it's better to go. But I think a loan is more likely than a permanent sale, simply because it's counterproductive for Manchester United to go and make a book loss there. And naturally, Højlund's perspective may change after he speaks to Ruben Amorim, or if they realise the new number 9 is close, Højlund may reconsider. But right now, until that 9 arrives, I think he is predominantly focused on Manchester United and trying to win over some critics in pre-season. But there's a long summer ahead, and I still think there is a realistic possibility, because of how interested multiple Italian clubs are, that Højlund does go out on loan. It's just then what kind of structure and what kind of financial benefit to Manchester United. Nobody's going to give them back what they paid. It's a similar story we know for Antony as well. And therefore, at best, you get loan with obligation. But I think that's unlikely as far as the Italian suitors are concerned. Halfway house, loan with option. That's contingent on the fact, though, Højlund wants the ability to go permanently. If he doesn't agree to that, the option means nothing, or just a straight loan. You offset the wage, you bring in a bit of money, you reduce your squad size with another number 9 coming in, and then you revisit the situation in a year's time, hoping 1, he finds form in Italy or elsewhere, and 2, his valuation grows as a result.
And then, is there any other strikers we should keep an eye on that list, Ben? I know we spoke about Gyokeres and Ekitike, but Mateta, you spoke about Mitrovic before, Osimhen, or any other new strikers on that list that we don't know about?
So Viktor Osimhen, keep getting asked, still not aware of anything. I know I'm going against the grain a little bit, but my information has been quite consistent there that 1, Gyokeres more viable than Osimhen, and 2, Manchester United are not in that race for Viktor Osimhen, and Osimhen will not bend on these wage demands. It's not about the number, it's again about the structure. He doesn't want a reduction in seasons without Champions League football, and things like that make it very difficult for Manchester United. I don't think we can discount Benjamin Sesko. I know we've not heard a lot of noise from Manchester United, but once again, you've got this either or at Arsenal, Sesko, Gyokeres. Let's say they do Gyokeres, then Sesko becomes a bit more of an open race. I don't think Chelsea will now do Sesko because he's too similar profile to Liam Delap. That's why they're considering João Pedro or Mohamed Kudus. So Sesko, if he wants a Premier League move, if Arsenal doesn't come off, maybe it does. But should that move not materialise in the coming days or weeks, then maybe Manchester United revisit the Sesko situation, because we know that along with Chelsea and Arsenal, they were one of the clubs pitching to Sesko 12 months ago. And vice versa, if Sesko goes to Arsenal, you start to think maybe the door is open to Gyokeres and Manchester United. So, like I said before, there's no way Manchester United are just sitting saying, let's wait for Arsenal to make a decision. However, it is very possible that Arsenal bring in their striker before Manchester United do, and whichever one of those 2 that is left could still be on Manchester United's radar. Mateta, I think, is difficult because Crystal Palace want to dig in. If they're to sell a big name and bring in money in a year where they're likely to have European football, we have to wait and see what happens with the whole Nottingham Forest complaint. But assuming they stay in the Europa League and there's optimism, then if they need money, it might be Mark Guehi that departs because he's only got 1 year left on their contract. I think Oliver Glasner would prefer to keep Mateta. And Mitrovic is still one to watch. Wage is an issue, but Al Hilal, believe it or not, and we're going round in this hell loop of Osimhen lack of clarity, have still not given up on Viktor Osimhen. So they made an offer. He rejected them before the Club World Cup. In fact, they made 4 offers, the highest of which was 40 million net a year, plus some bonuses on top. And he turned them down. And Saudi were really annoyed by it because the same central part of the Saudi Pro League that are part of the financing was saying, we made 3 offers for Al Hilal 12 months ago. Then at the end of the window, we made 1 offer for Al Ahly. And then again, we returned because the feeling has always been Viktor Osimhen is open to Saudi Arabia, and still he said no. But Al Hilal feel like the no was not a hard no. It was a no, I don't want to go immediately end of the season for the Club World Cup. I want to wait, deliberate. So Hilal might be back for Osimhen. And similarly, you've got Galatasaray who are pushing. Juventus could be there, but it's very difficult for them to finance it. Speaking of Juventus, we hear a lot of reports recently about Manchester United and Dusan Vlahovic. I'm not aware that that one's advancing. A bit like we said with Gyokeres and others, Ekitike, it'd be normal for Manchester United to inquire on that kind of deal. But I think there's some concerns over his injury record, and I don't get the impression that he's the top striker target for Manchester United. So at this stage, nothing to get excited about, I'm told, or advancing between Vlahovic and Manchester United. But when you sort of spell it out like that, you got all these kind of names in the mix, which tells you that Manchester United are really just in an internal process post-lap of running data and deciding who their kind of top few are. Coming back to Al Hilal, Mitrovic high wage. If Osimhen was to join Al Hilal, Mitrovic will likely be forced out. There might be a possibility that Hilal consider a loan with some kind of wage coverage. And the Mitrovic thing is a bit left field with Manchester United in the sense that they weren't looking at him as a profile in the same vein as Gyokeres is, or potentially some of the other names we've mentioned. This was more short term. It was about, is there opportunism? Can we get the wage coverage? Because Saudi Arabia have got quotas for foreign players. And if they bring in Osimhen, it's not just about the fact that he supplants Mitrovic, it's the fact they've got to lose foreigners or they have to deregister these players. So you have a situation where actually it's in Al Hilal's interest to potentially loan Mitrovic, free up the squad space, bring in another striker. And that was kind of the formulation of the inquiry. If you get later in the window and you need another striker, you need someone to compete with potentially one of these other names coming in, or you don't find that striker and you decide you're going to go Højlund, Zirkzee and one more, then maybe there's that opportunism for Mitrovic on a loan with wage coverage, possible option to buy, but it was very much short term and likely in addition to another striker coming in or as a backup, because maybe they run into a dead end and then they feel that the kind of goals and Premier League experience that he offers could be very beneficial, which is why we might have to be patient on the Mitrovic situation. And it's a strange one because there was this real feeling it might resolve itself by June the 10th because it was tied to Osimhen. And then when Osimhen doesn't come off, there's now a feeling that Osimhen might drag on and therefore Mitrovic might drag on. So you've actually got both extremes where it could have happened before the 10th of June if Osimhen had said yes. And now we might have to wait until towards the end of the window because Manchester United may prefer to go for these more long-term, younger options and then revisit Mitrovic a bit later in the window, depending on how the sort of chips fall.
It's definitely something interesting to keep an eye on. And I suppose if we did go for a player like Mitrovic, it might free Manchester United up a little bit more money to maybe spend elsewhere. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, because we've seen your report on Martinez, been very good around that story, Emi Martinez from Aston Villa. I mean, but it's also been reported that Onana, it'll be a big struggle for him to leave. So how do them deals happen together, Ben? Like Emi Martinez and Manchester United, but also on the Onana stance of maybe not being able to move him on.
Yeah, Onana's perspective is nobody's told him yet that he's surplus to requirements, so he's only focused on Manchester United. I think I said on the last show, he didn't just go on the postseason tour, he went to India. And when you're rolling players out for commercial activations, they're usually the ones that are part of your squad. It's counterproductive, isn't it, to be marketing and using players if they're in the process of exiting. So nobody's said anything to Onana yet. We've had a lot of links between Onana and Neom FC in Saudi Arabia. I'm told there hasn't actually been any meaningful talks between Onana and that particular club, despite reports. So he doesn't have a concrete option yet. And he would like to stay at Manchester United. But goalkeepers in particular can change their perspective because they realise if another name comes in that's out of their control, they're down the pecking order and they're likely to get less game time, unlike an outfield player that may say, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to fight for my place. I'm going to see whether I can change the manager's mind. Goalkeeper's a bit more of a locked position. So it can be simultaneously true that Manchester United like the idea of Emi Martinez and Onana feels he wants to stay at the club and fight for his place. But if Martinez arrives, does Onana's perspective change because Manchester United say you're not going to be playing as regularly? And that's why I think Onana will keep his position of nothing is communicated. He simply wants to stay. He's not thinking about moving away. He's the number one at Manchester United. And he'll wait to see whether anything concrete happens. If Manchester United get Martinez, let's see whether Onana's position changes. And I don't think Manchester United, if Onana did want to stay, would feel it was a disaster because they'd have two goalkeepers that could compete. If they pick Martinez and Onana still wants to stay, then you've got ultimately a number two or the ability to rotate, and still Bayindir could depart, which is why the original plan for the goalkeeper situation was actually to find a number two. So Onana's situation is open. Coming back to Martinez, the player has made it clear that he would be willing to move. And that's not to say he's begging for Manchester United. It's not to say he's directly called up Ruben Amorim or anything like that. But the player camp have said they would be interested in a move to Manchester United. And now the ball is in Manchester United's court as to whether they advance that. Atletico Madrid are the other club, but that's contingent on Jon Oblak leaving. And if Manchester United move, they have to think about the financing of the deal as well. But I would keep an eye on the Emi Martinez situation in the next 2 or 3 weeks, because the financial year is closing. The week after the financial year closes, there's this near miss period. So basically, Villa have got maximum 4 weeks, probably closer to 3, to show any outgoings they want to put on this financial year are either done or started now. Because the near miss period, without going into too much detail, is basically if you show you were trying to get it done for the end of the financial year, if you miss the cutoff, there's a bit more leeway, and then you can still put it on the financial year. And Villa need money. Their PSR position is difficult. They don't have Champions League football. What are their options? They could sell Morgan Rogers, but they consider him untouchable. There is Saudi interest in Yuri Tielemans, but he doesn't want to go. And again, they consider him untouchable. They'd like to sell Jacob Ramsey to Neom FC, but that deal is nowhere close. Again, despite reports, Neom FC seem to be linked with everybody, but they're not advancing on Jacob Ramsey. That's the one they'd really like to do. Ollie Watkins could be sold, but you'd probably need more money to replace him. So then you have Onana and you have Martinez, and you think, is there a situation where Manchester United could move now and then it would force Onana's hand? And is there a situation where Martinez needs to be sold because at maybe 30 to 40 million, Villa could bring in the money, satisfy their financial position, and still find a replacement whilst pocketing the change? And it may be that reluctantly they do have to sell Emi Martinez, and the player seemed to wave goodbye on the last home Premier League game of last season. So now we have to wait and see. Once again, for Manchester United, the irony is they would rather wait till July for that kind of deal, and Villa may say we need to sell now, and if no one comes in for him, they may sell another player, and then they may dig in and say he's well contracted, we've satisfied our PSR position. So there's a slight period of uncertainty and intrigue where if you want to do Martinez, the best possible window is the next 2 weeks, because Villa may be forced to sell. And Martinez would be keen, I'm told, on a move to Manchester United. But if you delay, because you don't know what's going on with Onana and because you want to put your outgoings into the next financial year, Villa may do what Newcastle did 12 months ago and find other ways to bring in that money and then shut the door on a Martinez exit, even if the player wants the move. The reason why I bring up the Newcastle example is Liverpool were there for Anthony Gordon. They had a deal worth about 80 million lined up. The player would have moved. And then suddenly, Yakuba Minter went to Brighton. Elliot Anderson went to Nottingham Forest. Newcastle's money add up. And they go, okay, Gordon's not for sale anymore. So keep an eye on the next 2 weeks, whether Manchester United or another club, because this is the window when, if you're really to bully Villa into getting the deal you're looking for due to their PSR position, there might be a deal to be had. If it doesn't happen in the next 2 weeks, Villa may feel they're in a stronger position. And
if it doesn't happen, Ben, have you heard anything on Diogo Costa? Because I keep hearing that name.
Yeah, it's another name that Manchester United have discussed and is appreciated within the group too. So could also be one to watch. I'm not aware of any approach at this stage, but he is a name that I've also heard has been discussed internally. And then we shouldn't discount the fact that some kind of number 2 will come in, and it will be a younger goalkeeper for the future. And they will stick with Onana in the short term. And what I've realised and been burned the hard way in the past is when you report on goalkeepers and you go all in, you get a lot of rewriting. So right now it's true that Manchester United are assessing the market for 1s and 2s, whilst simultaneously keeping the Onana situation open. If they bring in a young number 2, it will inevitably be billed to big up the confidence of Onana that they never wanted Martinez, they never wanted Costa, they were never looking at a number 1. They always told Onana that he was part of the plans. And you have to do that, right? In the same way that it's obvious Chelsea tried for Mike Maignan, but if Rob Sanchez ends up being their number 1, they're not going to say we failed to get a number 1 goalkeeper. They're going to say we never really went for Maignan. It was a cursory inquiry, because you have to big up that number 1 goalkeeper. So there'll be a little bit of rewriting depending on whether Onana stays or goes, about what Manchester United actually wanted in the market. In terms of number twos, they like the idea of Jordi Petrovic at Chelsea, who is available due to a gentleman's pact for 30 million euros, but that price is too high. And also Petrovic wants to be a number one. And I don't see Manchester United gambling on Petrovic despite his potential in the number one area. I think Manchester United's interest in Petrovic was only as a young number two. And I'm not sure anything will happen there because of the price and because of the fact the player wants to be a number one. We've got the historical links with Ilham Melia, but I never got the belief there was anything really in that. And if he leaves Leeds, again, he wants to start every week. And he wasn't particularly consistent in the Championship last season. So I've had that one shut down quite a lot, to be honest. The Joan Garcia links were genuine, but he wanted to be a number one and has now joined Barcelona. And a lot of these young goalkeepers backing themselves to go and play for a club every single week and take that number one a bit earlier than we're used to in terms of the age of goalkeepers. And as a consequence, that was a deal that Manchester United couldn't do. Lucas Chevalier is another one at Lille. He is prepared to come in and be a number two. Newcastle United are another club to watch there. James Trafford's Newcastle's priority. If that deal doesn't get done, Newcastle could turn to Lucas Chevalier. Manchester United like that goalkeeper as well. I think he's 23 years of age. And Manchester United and Trafford has definitely been discussed and come up in conversations as well. But again, I'm not sure Manchester United are moving there because Burnley are asking for something in the region of 40 million. You could make an argument if you were prepared to pay 40 million. And Villa are saying 30, 40 million for Martinez. Do you go for the younger option who's going to give you more longevity? Or is there a debate that you buy a 32-year-old and you get an instant proven Premier League goalkeeper and World Cup winner? Only Jason Wilcox would know the answer to that. But I still think that number, 40 million for Trafford, 40 million for Emi Martinez, both those players, both those prices, unless they drop, feel a bit high for Manchester United. So let's see what direction they move in. But there's certainly a hot debate within United about the goalkeepers at the moment. And first they have to clarify they're going for a number one or a number two. Then they have to communicate a decision to Onana. But next 2 weeks, not just for Manchester United, for everyone, keep an eye on the Emi Martinez situation, because if Villa are to sell, then it might just happen before the end of the financial year.
Thank you, Ben, for that one. We now have some super chats in that I'll bring into you. Quick fire if possible. We've got Surich.
Have I ever done quick fire?
Ben, we love it. We love it. Surich Duta says, Ben's opinion on the feasibility of the Estupinan deal.
Yeah, it's a name that I broke and it's a name that I keep hearing, and it's backed up by the fact sources say, oh, fullback is needed. And I don't know whether that calls into question the Luke Shaw situation. We'll have to wait and see. But at this stage, it's not like they've actually made a bid or any meaningful approach to Brighton. And I sense that that will be one that comes later in the window. So right now, it's very hard to answer that question in terms of chances. I'm just being perfectly honest with you, because you only really assess the chances of a transfer when the wheels start in motion. And watching a player, adding a player to a shortlist versus starting that engagement are two completely different things. So number one priority, Mbeumo, to determine that situation one way or the other. And I repeat, there's optimism. Number two, number 9, all budget put to that number 9. And then from there, everything else is really outgoings and at high volume before we start to understand what else is possible. And that's why, even if Martinez became available now, Man United may not even be in a position to move. And they may say, we'll have to wait. And if we had that 40 million, we're going to put that towards our collective budget for that number 9. So it's important to understand what the positional priorities are for United first, and the fact that due to that financial situation, they may have to be a bit patient. But once we see some outgoings and resolving the likes of Rashford and Antony and so on, then we'll understand what budget is remaining. And at that point, I'll be able to give you a better answer as to whether Estupinan is possible or not. But he's definitely the kind of profile that Manchester United are looking for and like. So he's on the list, but being on the list doesn't at this stage provide a guarantee that anything is going to advance, because at the time we're live, there's been no approach to Brighton.
Thank you for that, Ben. My next one is from Keel Robinson saying, what does Rashford do now Barcelona is unlikely? And I'm assuming he's nodding to the fact that they're looking to close in on the Nico Williams deal.
Yeah, very interesting question. We hear reports of Newcastle. That's not my understanding. He doesn't feel an Eddie Howe kind of player. And more importantly, Rashford needs to go somewhere where he starts for his England chances and because of the kind of player he is. And even though it's not worked out at Manchester United, he showed at Villa that he can be a very important and impactful player. On that left at Newcastle, you've got Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes, and Barnes finished the season in phenomenal form. Newcastle looking for a right-sided attacker. That's not Marcus Rashford. So I don't think that will be an option. It's unlikely that Villa come back in unless they have some incredible sale, satisfy their financial position. We get very late in the window and Manchester United decide they're maybe going to do another loan with an option. But at this stage, I have no indication that Villa are going to come back and effectively trigger that 40 million. And, even though he's returned, the 40 million kind of remains because that is Manchester United's asking price. So the option they agreed with Villa is basically the number and the structure to the entire market. And that's where we stand with the valuation on Rashford. And in the same way, as I said before with Mbeumo, that Brentford will keep quoting these high numbers this early in the window, Manchester United will keep sticking to this 40 million for now. But if time ticks away, let's see whether there's a different structure and solution for Rashford, which might open him up to a higher pool of suitors. Regarding Barcelona, Rashford wants Barca, but as you rightly say, they're moving in a different direction at the moment. And if they get Nico Williams over the line, then it's highly unlikely Rashford goes to Barcelona. It's not a given that Williams signs, but the player's keen. He's prepared to lower his salary demands for Barca compared to the numbers offered to other clubs. And there's a 58 million euros release clause, which is relative market value. There's taxes. And the only downside the release clause for Nico Williams is one lump sum. And therefore, Barca have to be able to afford that. So it's not over yet, 100% between Barca and Rashford, but their number one priority to put all their outlay on is Nico Williams. And they love the idea of Nico Williams on one side, Lamine Yamal on the other, two international teammates. That's the dream. It has been for quite some time. So Rashford's going to have to look elsewhere. And at the moment, I'm not aware of that many concrete options because the wage is high and the 40 million number is not something that suitors want to pay. We know Milan were there in January, but they've got no Champions League football and their finances are tight as well. I think Rashford will have other options in Italy from what I'm told. Saudi is still there. Al Ahly are prepared to do that deal if Rashford changes his mind. So there will be opportunities for him. But at this stage, I think Rashford, now Barcelona's looking less likely, is going to have to be patient because Manchester United are not going to do him any favours, at least for this part of the window. Let's see if it changes in the final weeks. But right now, there is no loan opportunity for Rashford. There is no loan opportunity for Antony. There is no cut price deal for Garnacho. Manchester United are firm in their valuation because there's so much time left in the window. And as a consequence, Rashford doesn't actually have, other than Barcelona, at this stage, that many concrete options. So may have to be a little bit patient. What I'm told from the player perspective is he does want Champions League football. And again, that's seen as important for his England chances. So at the moment, no real clarity on where he could go next, other than to reiterate what you said in your question, that Barcelona now, compared to maybe 3 weeks ago, is looking less likely.
Is there any possibility whatsoever that he stays and starts again with Ruben Amorim, or do you think that's off the table?
I mean, you never want to say off the table because as long as you're contracted to Manchester United Football Club, things can change. And the whole point with Amorim and Rashford was he wants to see Rashford applying himself and showing a high intensity in training and then naturally replicating that on the field. And from Amorim's point of view, he's very firm with players and high in his standards. But if you look at his time at Sporting, he's also very fair as well. But I think when you look at the money Manchester United need to fund other positions, when you look at the wage they'd like to get off the book, and when you look at the fact that this Rashford situation dating back to Ten Hag, even though he's brilliant in that one season, but after that, the Rashford kind of issues with Manchester United started. And inevitably, there'll be two sides to the story. But Rashford was a completely different player at Villa to Manchester United. So for whatever reason, he's not now seen as a financial or cultural fit at the football club. And I don't think, barring anything unexpected, that's going to change. So I think Manchester United see it as suiting all parties that Rashford moves on. And financially, that money is important, both in terms of the fee and getting the wage off the book. So I'd be surprised if he plays another competitive Premier League game for Manchester United. Antony's a sort of different story in the sense that he's done brilliantly at Betis. And there might be a possibility that he's integrated in pre-season until a solution is found. Still, all parties would like him to go. But Manchester United don't want to do Betis a favour and just give them another loan. They want a permanent solution. Antony had said, I think, to Manuel Pellegrini that the whole point of succeeding at Betis was, quote, revenge, to show Manchester United what he can do. So maybe Manchester United would be prepared to let that one wait and see how he acts in pre-season, whilst, of course, still trying to prioritise an exit. But I think Antony is actually maybe more of the belief his time at Manchester United is done. I think there's a little bit of acrimony there on the player side. He doesn't feel like he was given a fair opportunity at Manchester United. Again, two sides to every story. And obviously with Garnacho, the simple fact is that if you sell him and get that one done early, you have a situation where you've got pure profit on the books and you can move a bit more freely in the market. So I think right now, Manchester United feel Garnacho, Sancho, Antony, Rashford, the aim, the ideal preference is to move them all on, because collectively, if you can sort all four out, you suddenly free up a lot of budget.
Well, Josh Ward just put a super chat in saying what's happening with Garnacho. There was reports saying he was preferencing the Premier League. Napoli looked like they're looking at Grealish and maybe even Sancho. Is there any clubs coming to the table for Garnacho yet, or is there not any clear pathway yet for him?
Yeah, I think it's true that Garnacho would like to stay in the Premier League. Napoli is a great club, though, as well. And by all accounts, he would have been willing to join in January. The challenge there was 50 million euros was offered, and Manchester United had a valuation of 70 million euros, which is roughly 60 million quid. And that number hasn't changed. So the Garnacho situation is open. Chelsea are prioritising Jamie Gittins. If they get that one over the line, I don't think they'll sign Garnacho as well, even though Mudryk has been charged by the FA for a doping offence and could face a 4-year suspension, and Sancho's returned. But remember, former Manchester United target Giovanni Quenda is coming in at Chelsea in 2026. And Chelsea, unlike Manchester United, don't view him as a fullback. They think he's a winger on that left side, which means I think Chelsea will likely, not definitively, but likely only do one. So if Gittins arrives, Garnacho is off the table. Napoli haven't changed their valuation for Garnacho, which makes doing a deal problematic. Then we've heard some recent links with Spurs. I'm not aware of anything advanced there. What I would say is that Matistel stays. Son's future has a bit of a question mark over it. The priority is a right-sided attacker. So if Mbeumo doesn't go to Spurs because he still prefers Manchester United, they've got Semenya and Tyler Dibbling. They also might look at a more central, versatile player like a Mohamed Kudus. But the left-hand side, I think Tottenham would only strengthen on if Son decides to go to Saudi Arabia or elsewhere. And again, that may happen later in the window. So Garnacho and Spurs, nothing really developing yet, even though we're hearing a lot of rumours. Later in the window, let's see if Tottenham choose to add a player on that left-hand side in addition to Tell. And then Villa are the other club to watch. And obviously, it's difficult for them to pull off. But one neat solution, and again, I'm just putting it out there because we saw a lot of these separate or mirrored deals 12 months ago. I'm certainly not implying this is happening or this is what the clubs are doing yet. But there could be a scenario where if Manchester United choose to proceed with Martinez, there might be a way of offering up Garnacho in a separate deal, putting that on the next financial year for Villa, putting the money for Martinez on this financial year. And that was the whole logic of all of these two deals, club to club, not swap deals, but separate deals, because when you buy the player right on the end of the financial year, you chuck that money on the next financial year. When you sell the player, you take that fee on this financial year, and it's win-win. One is amortized, and one obviously reflects very positively on your books immediately. And that's why we saw a lot of mirrored deals 12 months ago. It's not really a fad that we've seen so far, but it could be the start of it these next 2 or 3 weeks. So it might be worth keeping an eye on Villa and Garnacho. Their interest is genuine, but obviously the big priority for Villa is outgoings, not incomings, especially in the next few weeks.
I think that'd be a great move for Villa. I really do. And the way that you explained it there in terms of the finances, I think it could work really well. So, I mean, we'll have to see what happens with that. But thank you for that update.
You could just say, Beth, that if Villa go down that line and that big outlay and Garnacho's 60 odd million with a relatively high wage, then why do Villa not do the same thing and come back in for Marcus Rashford? Because in theory, Villa like the idea of keeping Rashford. It's just the financial issues around it. And maybe it's also the fact that Rashford's not prepared to join a club without Champions League football. So you could see a scenario where people, now Rashford and Barcelona is off, talk again about Villa and Rashford. But I think at the moment, Rashford wants Champions League football. And maybe the Garnacho wage is obviously also a factor because it's expensive, but it's still cheaper than Rashford's as well. So could be worth watching, but obviously it will all depend on Manchester United and if they turn their interest in Emi Martinez into something concrete in the coming weeks.
I was going to say that the wage might be the swaying factor in that. Last thing I'll ask you about, Ben, because I know you've got to hurry on with your day, but TJ's has said Manchester United need to sell a lot of players and definitely strengthen the midfield. Are there any midfielders that United have been talking to, or any midfielders that might leave Manchester United?
Yeah, the midfield is, again, something that could happen later in the window. They could make an addition there. I suppose technically they have done that with Cunha, and if Mbeumo comes off, that's 2 10s that can play in midfield. So it's not like they're not actively looking. We said on the last show that they were one of the clubs that have been offered Mohamed Kudus, and to be clear, that was a West Ham initiation. So there's nothing to suggest that Manchester United are going to do that deal. I think Chelsea are still considering Kudus. Maybe, though, there's room for more of a modern central midfielder, or box-to-box, or even potentially a 6 as well. I don't have a lot of names at the moment. When we spoke about Mitrovic being a more short-term solution, as I said on the last show, Wilf Ndidi is a name that Manchester United have at least discussed. Not something for the long term, not necessarily a box office starter, but someone that at 9 million, because of a relegation release clause, could be an economical signing and a useful squad player. We wait and see whether anything develops there. Xavi Simons is another player that has been long linked with Manchester United, again, more attack-minded. I'm not sure they'll go down that route because Cunha, number 10, and Mbeumo, central. It feels like there's not room for one more because you've got Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes. So I'm not expecting anything to develop there. But 6 months or so ago, there were certainly some discussions. And I think the player's keen on a move to the Premier League. I just don't think you've got a fit there in terms of Manchester United's squad. But what we have to remember is if you think about the more deeper lying midfielders, there's big faith in Manuel Ugarte to be a real fit in this system and thrive. And I think that we'll really see him continue to grow into his Manchester United role and become a top player. And that is the perspective, I'm told, of Ruben Amorim. And then you got Kobbie Mainoo. And despite all of the talk about pure profit, I still think Manchester United prefer to sell Garnacho and keep Kobbie Mainoo, and I still think the player would prefer to sign a new deal. So if he was to be sold and that situation was to dramatically change, then of course they'll strengthen in that area and they'll have funds to do so. But we shouldn't discount those slightly deeper lying midfielders already at the football club, because many of them are young. Some of them have arrived for big money. And I think Ruben Amorim quite likes the existing options that he has in that position.
Thank you very much, Ben. A very good update there. And I really hope that the club is right on Ugarte, because I'd like to see him thrive as well. So we'll see. And good news on Kobbie Mainoo. I hope he does end up signing that new contract, but we'll have to see, won't we? But Ben, thank you so much for joining us. So many updates there as per usual. Excellent updates from you. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everyone for your super chats as well. I think there's a couple there right at the end, but we've sort of answered them. We've got Kevin talking about what if United can't sell anyone and just loan them, how bad will it affect our transfer window? And kind of answered that in terms of after the Mbeumo deal, we are going to be looking to try and sell players to bring players in. Sam Air says, is there any talks regarding Fofana from Lyon? We didn't talk about that, but do you know anything of that, Ben?
Yeah, nothing major there. Could be a player that moves this window. I haven't been made aware yet from Lyon sources of too much outreach there. And remember, they sold Turkey too, so their financial situation is a little bit stronger. I suppose we can mention Diamande as well, a long-standing Manchester United target, but the price is so high there. And once again, Sporting are budgeting, even if they deny it publicly, for a Gyokeres exit somewhere. So I think they might be a little bit harder to deal with regarding another big exit. We're going to hear a lot of links with Branthwaite again. Everton's price hasn't changed, and no doubt other defenders that could potentially come in. But in that window where Manchester United were trying for Branthwaite, they obviously signed other defenders, so they are quite well covered in that position. And there's still a feeling that Harry Maguire can be very important in both boxes, seemingly. So I think if they add a defensive reinforcement as a priority, it will still be a fullback rather than a central defender.
Thank you, Ben, for the updates. And all that's left to say is thank you, everyone, for watching. We will see you on the next one.